Welcome and welcome back to the Marketing Made Inclusive podcast. I am your host, Joyann Boyce. And today we have a special guest. All my guests are special, but I've known David for a minute. David Maher Roberts. Hi, David. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, Joyann. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I have been excited to have you on the podcast because I think your podcast was one of the first I did.
Oh,
Yeah, and I was just like on the podcast taking notes, taking notes. So you've inspired me, but please do let the people know a little bit about you and your background.
sure. So I have been in digital media and tech startup world for the past 25, 30 years. I started my life in publishing. Way from university, I was the editor of the student magazine or student newspaper in Cardiff. That's how I got into journalism and into understanding how to build your own newspaper. And then I went to a job at Future Publishing in Bath and worked on computer game magazines. And then, I sort of accelerate through that. I then moved from magazines into digital. So I launched Games Radar and Tech Radar, all of those big, massive websites that are out these days. And I ran all of the digital stuff for Future globally. So I did a lot of work with consumer stuff. And then I went to tech startups and worked for Peter Gabriel. And I was the CEO of a startup for him called The Filter, which was a machine learning music playlist tool, which we then turned into, because we couldn't make much money out of that, and we turned it into a recommendation engine for videos mainly. So we plugged it into Dailymotion, the big video site, for example, but we also use it for music with Sony Music and a lot of other clients. And in the UK, the BT Vision set-top box use that recommendation technologies to recommend what you might want to watch next. So I really got into tech and startups, and I then did various other things. I basically created and launched Tech Spark, that you probably know, given that you're very involved with it. And with a bunch of friends, we also launched the Sparkies, started that whole thing going, and did that for 5-6 years before handing it over to a professional team, as opposed to us, that we were a bunch of volunteers trying to do it in our spare time. And then since then I've basically worked for another publishing company, Immediate Media, who have a lot of BBC properties like Top Gear and BBC Good Food and stuff like that. And I ran their sports division. So I looked after all of the sports side of things. And then I joined a marketing agency called Dialect. So that was back in 2017. It was an American agency that was based in San Francisco, run by a couple of friends of mine. And they had just won Logitech as a client. And there was only like 8 or 10 of them. And they suddenly won this global client. And they were like, oh my God, we need some help. How can you help us build a team? So I joined them and as COO and built their team. And it then went on to be like 80 plus people and a really big thing. So that was a journey, and did that for 6 years. And then since then, I left in May of this year. And I've basically gone back to startup world and looking after founders, advising companies. Like I advise Gravity Well, who are Bristol's venture studio, and I advise 1860, who are a podcast production agency based in Bristol as well. And I advise Bristol Innovations, which is a part of the university. So that kind of gives you a bit of a tour. I haven't mentioned my podcast in the process because right now they're kind of all asleep. But I love podcasting, as you know. And one of the reasons I work with 1860, the podcast agency, is they do podcasts for brands. And so I can still do a little bit of podcasting by actually helping them with my business experience. But I had my own podcasts. I had a project called Podworld, which is a podcast recommendation podcast.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
So that one was great. I was doing that with Louise Blaine, a friend of mine, she's the professional in the group. She's like a proper radio presenter. And we did that during pretty much throughout lockdown. We did we did about 24 episodes. And the idea was we would choose a theme like love or murder or something, and then we would recommend podcasts that we would have a listen to. So that was the idea of Podworld.
I didn't know about Podworld. So you had a podcast talking about other podcasts.
Yes, it's very meta. But because Louise and I are such massive podcast fans, we could just talk about podcasts all the time. And during lockdown, obviously, podcast listener numbers went through the roof. So we just thought, people have got time. Let's do a show about podcasts. And then we would invite other podcasters on and chat about podcasting. So we had, it was really good fun. And then I had the one that we talked about, I can't remember. It was either What Now, which was a marketing podcast. Was it that one?
Yeah, okay. It was What Now.
So What Now was again done during the pandemic, and that was really done for Dialect, for my agency. It was basically, what the hell is happening out there? What do we do now? So we spoke to marketeers across across the UK, and that was really good fun. But the first project I did was called Seeking Out the Next Generation, and that I did as a group project with basically about 7 or 8 kids, as I like to call them, but they're probably all in their early 20s. But it involves my daughter Ella, who's a big fan of podcasting, and it involved all the youngsters at my agency pretty much. And the idea was, there are so many great young people out there with really inspirational stories, but they don't necessarily have a platform frequently because, and this does probably talk to the general idea of inclusivity, because most platforms are owned and run by the sort of usual people that own and run media, right? So the stories tend to be always either older people, I don't mean super old, but like people my age, right? And so I was just inspired by these incredible 17, 18-year-olds, and there was a whole raft of stories from people who had battled through illness, other people who there was this one guy who played for Manchester City as a kid and then got these terrible injuries, and he basically, his entire dreams just collapsed, and then he reinvented himself as this incredible businessman, and ended up on The Apprentice. So it was lots of great stories. So that was a long ramble and intro, but there you go. That's me so far.
It's a multifaceted career, but there's a general theme throughout of media and content in all shapes and forms. Like, even when I had a look and you were talking about publishing, I was just like, I know you so much as a digital person that the idea that you published and printed physical things, I know I'm speaking like a Zennial or Millennial or whatever, but it was like,
the idea snap. There were things that you could print and read.
Like you had to do marketing and that was it. You had that box. How was that shift? Because I imagine I never did print publishing, I never did print marketing. To me, it seems like a whole different world. But how was the shift from that to digital?
It's a completely different world. So the shift was very, and still is for some companies, very challenging, because the business model, for starters, the business model is completely different, because predominantly content is free in the digital world. Now that's changing, actually. In the most recent times, that has started to change, but certainly for the first 10, 15 years of the revolution, it was free. And I came from a world of specialist publishing, which were like computer game magazines, movie magazines, and these were all magazines you could charge. I ran the official PlayStation magazine for a long time, which was the biggest magazine in computer games. It sold 400,000 copies a month at its height for £4.99. So, it had a disc on the front, which was one of the reasons. And so before the internet, you would use the disc to play demos of the games you might want to buy. So it was a fantastic marketing and distribution vehicle for Sony and the publishers. And then we obviously had an editorial team around that would pack it full of great content at the same time. But when you shift that to an internet model, There's no reason to charge for it. It becomes an advertising-led model. So suddenly you're going from niche publishing, and PlayStation's a bad example at 400,000 copies because most other niches were small. They were sub 100,000 a month, right? You go from niche to suddenly you're having to make money through advertising, which is a volume model. So suddenly you're having to you can't be that niche because if you're too niche, you make no money. So yeah, it was seismic, the change. I'm lucky that I've always been interested in technology. I think that's the other constant through my career is not just being communication, media communication. It's been also technology.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the university, we were one of the first. We moved to desktop publishing from cutting up bromides, which obviously you're too young for this sort of stuff. But cutting up bromides, you used to have to print out on the special paper your stories in just strips, and you would cut them and paste them as how they would be laid out.
Oh.
Yeah, man, it was crazy.
Copy editing then must have been painful.
And then if you saw a typo, you would cut it out with a scalpel. But anyway, that's gone off on a tangent. But yes, so the shift from that to desktop publishing was we do it all on the computer and print it out as a page. So I led that at the university, and then that got me my job because I moved to Future that was really advanced for a publishing house. They were already on desktop publishing. They were already on Apple computers back in, this was what, 92, 93, so quite early on.
Mm-hmm.
And so throughout my career, when I was doing print, the transition for me was I spotted early on that this is going to change the world. And I think I was surrounded by a lot of ostriches who were like burying their heads.
Yeah,
so
print for life.
And they were very scared of it because they thought for their careers, this makes no sense. We can't make any money. So they would stay away from it. So at Future, I was lucky. I could just put my hand up and go, hey, I'll take this on. And so I was given this crazy role at a fairly young age to run digital for a global corporation. So that was fun.
I can imagine.
But yeah, it took ages to figure out. And I think Future's only just in the last 5 years figured it out, and they are now a success story because they've realized that actually content doesn't operate in a vacuum online. Content is the way to attract attention and engage people, and you actually then move them down a funnel towards e-commerce. And once they got comfortable with that, they suddenly realized, the SEO process, and now that if you ever look for gift ideas for men, you will come across like a Tech Radar article or something like that. So they've managed the transition, but this is, it's taken 20 years. So yeah, brutal.
And in that time, I can imagine, well, first off, I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, inclusive marketing as a concept wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to you in relation to your career journey?
That's such a good question. So I guess trying to think of the best way to answer this. I think certainly in my publishing journey, inclusivity generally was not a thing, and actually I operated in a very white, male-dominated, salesy, let's even call it, environment that was for me, it was very uncomfortable. I didn't talk too much about my background, but I'm obviously a white guy in my 50s, but I grew up. I didn't grow up in the UK. I grew up in Belgium. I grew up in an international environment. So my mother's French. My father's British, and actually my wife is Dutch and Irish. And even though that's certainly all white, it's from a cultural perspective.
You had some stuff around you. You had difference around you. Yeah.
And I went to school in an international school, so I had friends that were all from quite well off backgrounds. I think that's the important thing. But they were diplomats from Egypt and from Mauritius, and so culturally, and my first girlfriend was Danish, and it's basically, I've always loved being surrounded by cultural differences. That is definitely at my core. So the reason I'm saying that is that when I was in this British publishing environment, it's quite uncomfortable because it was very single-mindedly English, British, but it was also very male, and the environment for women there was atrocious, really, really atrocious. The way that guys would talk about them, witnessed some pretty horrific, just the classic stuff from the 90s of guys drinking at lunchtime and being oafs, I'm going to say, rather than swearing too much.
But you can swear. I've sworn so many times. But I'm curious to know, because I'm assuming those same men had to create campaigns for women, and women, they knew women were their target audience.
Well, so this is the area I was in was all games and computer games. And in those days, well, today the smart marketeer knows that games and computer games is definitely not male only. In fact, when you're thinking about games, because of mobile gaming and indeed even just console gaming, women play as much, if not in some cases on mobile, more than men. But in those days, it was very seen as niche. It was even seen as like schoolboys, teenagers, guys, and so it was focused. That was the focus.
That was the focus. Okay.
Incorrectly, and actually, Sony and the PlayStation did start changing that, as did Nintendo once the Wii came along and all that sort of stuff. But it was more just a sign of the times. I mean, I don't know if you remember the magazines in those days that were out there. Again, you're probably too young, but there was basically FHM and Loaded were the two big men's lifestyle magazines. They were huge. They were selling 300,000 copies. And you know what was on the front cover of every single one? It was a woman without any clothes on, pretty much.
Yeah.
With a piece of technology, maybe hiding a boob
somewhere, this is the focus of the magazine, tech, but ignore everything else. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that was the environment. That was, there was lots of good things about the 90s in the UK in terms of certainly there was this, Cool Britannia and Britpop and all this sort of stuff, and Tony Blair coming and all that. But there was also, inclusivity, I don't think was really there, certainly not in the way that I saw it. So I think that there was clear sexism for sure. And then in the campaigns I was involved with, because I was mostly in a male-dominated market, it was also very just single-mindedly aimed at guys. So that was definitely the case. But in terms of cultural differences or anything like that, it was just not on the radar. Really not. I mean, funny enough, from a recruitment point of view, I would say that actually Future, we did try just find the best writers, and that didn't matter where they came from. Again, there was a bias just by the nature of the who the audience was, but we did, I definitely did bring in some very, very different people into the mix, and it was like, you didn't need a university degree, you didn't need to, especially in the game side, you needed to love games, you needed to know how to communicate about them and connect with the audience. So that allowed us to bring some very different voices, but yeah, it wasn't really a thing. And then when I'm thinking about the games market, so the people that bought the advertising in the magazines, and that was all very, that was all very much white men who ran those campaigns.
So that was the 90s. When would you say was the first kind of, let's narrow it down, because it always starts in the oppression Olympics. It does always start with women. When would you say there was a shift? And I didn't really mean in the team, but a shift in awareness about, okay, you were in a sector that was like, hey, we need to market to women. We need to change what we're putting out. That wasn't so binary. Like, oh, we're selling lingerie, so it's women. Like, when would you say that shift kind of happened?
So, I mean, because I moved around, I saw it when I went back into publishing. I went into sports publishing, so I went suddenly into a very different sector. So it was cycling, triathlon, swimming, that sort of thing. And then that was very mixed. That was very mixed. It was very again, this is probably more so in a sort of gender perspective more than anything else. but it was suddenly not a thing. You know, it was all the advertising, all the copy, all the teams. It was a mix of people basically, and that so I saw that very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, when I then went to Dialect, which is a marketing agency focused on gaming and tech, so I went back into gaming and tech, and I joined a team of entirely white guys. so it didn't change, and that was 2017. So
Okay.
and
Oh,
that
but
yes.
they were American though.
Well, a few of them were American, yes, and
Okay.
a few of them were Brits. But the reason I'm giving you that is that when I joined there, having done all the other things, and it was a small company, and the founders gave me carte blanche to basically run the company the way I wanted to run it. The first thing I said is that I wanted to make this the best culture that we've ever worked in,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted it to be balanced. Certainly from a gender, but my focus was gender, to be very frank and honest with you at that point,
Mm-hmm.
because I was thinking, this is the first battle that we need to solve. And so within a few months, I'd brought some senior women into the team. And, it took us a while, a few years, but we got to, I think within 2 or 3 years, we got to a 50-50 gender split as we grew the team. So we deliberately focused on recruiting women, and also at all levels. And and when was it, 2021, I think we got to a point where the board was 50-50 as well. So at every level, we had pretty much a 50-50 split.
Did
So that was important.
it being an agency and having kind of you coming in with an agency that has history, did that change any dynamics with clients? Because I'm assuming that's you're bringing in and building up the British side. You're putting essentially your values into the environment you want to work with, but there's a history of how they were working with clients before. So was it any kind of conversation? How did that conversion happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was very positive, because actually the big clients we were dealing with, Logitech, Nvidia, Amazon at the time, all of them had very clear values and principles. And so actually, I remember specifically with Logitech, when them visibly seeing the team change in its makeup, was only greeted with, kind of not quite thank God, but more like, okay, you're
Like,
now
okay.
you're now more aligned with us than you might have been. So I think it was very positive, but it wasn't like a formally done so. It was more like behind the scenes, the CMO, etc., would be like, okay, this makes sense, and being introduced to the senior members that we were bringing in, as well as the makeup of the team. The challenge has been, as you know, has been more cultural diversity for certainly for building an agency in the West Country. That's been more challenging, not impossible. We have I say we, I'm not there anymore. Dialect
But
has
old habits die hard.
they do have a good cultural split from an international perspective. So there's certainly Asian, there's more international, let's say, inputs, because the company deals with global brands and global campaigns. So they have employees who come from China and the Philippines, and they have employees from India, and from, I'm trying to think, from the Czech Republic, and from Spain and Argentina. So there's lots of accents, and that's again one of the things I wanted, because it's what I loved when I was at school, all these accents and different languages, and but that's kind of as far as we managed to get.
So with that working with global brands and having the agency, which there's two elements to inclusive marketing I always talk about. It's a good thing to do, but it's also business as well, because it makes so much sense to have a global brand that's advertising games in those areas, thinking of those markets, bringing people in to work on those campaigns. How did you balance? Were you quite upfront with people in relations to, like, these are the big brands we're working with, we want your insights? Or was it more kind of bring the people along, they will bring their culture, or they will input and help us make ads for these various regions?
That's a really good question. Let me think about that. I think it started as we will hire internationally because that would bring diversity of thinking to everything that we do. Because if we have people from different backgrounds and different teams, that will automatically bring a different viewpoint, and not then forcing and being overtly going, therefore. So I think it started more, what's the opposite of overt? Anyway, not
unintentional, but
yes, it's more like let's create practical. Yes, so we're bringing together the right people, the people that from different backgrounds, and that should create diversity of thinking. So that's probably been the approach. But having said that, probably as we moved along, we realized that actually it had to become more intentional, and actually put the right people on the right international campaigns. So we were being a little bit more prescriptive, going, actually, if we're dealing with Asia, we should really bring the people that have an understanding of that market, or the cultural nuances into those conversations.
Because the nuances are so subtle in campaigns that you can't take let's say, I don't know any games. I only know Sims. I think we spoke about this one.
The Sims, I love it.
The Sims games. But yeah, you can't take a campaign for Sims that would be American or British and chuck it in like Morocco or any other country and think it's going to just land the same. There's tiny nuance. The game itself probably doesn't change, but the way you speak about it, the way you do the copy.
Absolutely. And even the way it's played sometimes. So even if the core game is the same, there will be different ways for people playing, especially when it's much more about collaborative gaming or multiplayer gaming across the internet. The way that you do it in different countries has different ways of playing. So it's really, really interesting.
I love the gaming sector. It's the one sector that I feel the communities that are pushing for change in advertising are ridiculously loud, but also very creative. I think the reason Sims always comes back up is because I remember before Sims started including a wider range of skin tones and a wider range of like hair types, the gamers started making it themselves. They were like, oh, we're just going to mod it. We're just going to make it. We don't care. We like the game. We don't like what the company's doing, but we're going to find our conversion. And it just speaks to how much technology has adapted over the years. Because when I first played that game, you couldn't mod anything. You just had to play it as is.
Yeah. And modding has changed everything, basically. And now with, the next wave of technology, and, there's the ability to, even if at its core AI or some models might have built-in biases, you can change those things fairly easily and fairly quickly, as long as you know that you need to change them, or you know how. Yes, exactly.
So that actually leads to my next question on the hottest topic, AI. How do you see that and its relation to marketing?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's got the answers at the moment, because it's moving so fast and changing so quickly. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because AI is allowing us to do certain things way faster than before. But it's also therefore allowing us to be potentially way lazier than before. And I think that the people that are going to win are those that are not going to just be lazy about it. They're going to actually use the time they gain to really work out the human nuances and the aspects that we were talking about earlier. Because you can structure ideas and documents, and you can even get AI to outline ideas for you, or to timeline things, or to break it down and even visualize stuff. It really helps speed things along. But it's very difficult, and I think it will be for some time, to just literally give AI a couple of lines and then expect a fully finished, polished, perfect campaign or series of creatives. I think it only gets you 70% of the way there. And even then it might be only 30% of the way there, but you still have to do the rest of it. So you can either be lazy and just do, okay, I'm just going to do the 30% myself, or use the 70% of time you've saved to make sure that you're even cleverer about the nuances. And that's where it gets interesting, because AI can also allow you to adapt things. So you might come up with the idea yourself and the creative yourself, but you might want to adapt it for 20 different countries. And it can certainly do things a lot speedier in language terms. And it can even, potentially you can replace the lip movement of the video and it lip syncs with the language that you've just put in. So all you've done is you've translated it. The script is now in German. It's coming out as German in the voice of the actor, in the same voice of the actor, and then the lip sync changes as well. So jeepers, that's great. The key though is, how do you make sure the nuances that we talked about are changed? You don't do a straight translation. So if you've got a bit of time, because of everything else has given you that time, I would work on that. How do you adapt the script so that it's more relevant to the German market or the Moroccan market?
That is so interesting, because, and it's funny you use that example. I was recently in the US and we were given the opportunity to tour the Disney sound studios. And interestingly, I made the assumption that when Disney created The Little Mermaid, they put it in a bunch of languages, they used AI. They said it was easier to find someone who can sing like Halle, The Little Mermaid, in the language than it was to try and get AI to adapt the nuance of how people speak. So word for word translations, it's like in the process, you still need the person.
Yes.
I was very much thinking of the campaigns you're talking, like, even if you were to implement AI into the process you have with dialect, you still need the person from that region with that local understanding.
You would do, yes. Yeah. I mean, the way that the voice training, the voice models are coming, that are being evolving, I guess, since The Little Mermaid. It is getting closer and closer now. Certainly in the spoken word, maybe not so in the singing world at this point, but certainly spoken word world. It's getting the nuances of even keeping the same voice but moving it into Italian. It's much more Italian in its style. So it's becoming cleverer in that sense, even pausing at the right time, putting the right emphasis on the right syllable, all of that stuff. It's probably not 100% there, but it's really close. So I think it will get there. So but back to the point is, you still need the local person, even if it's not to read it out in the long run, maybe now, but in the long run, I reckon that will be replaced. But it's actually in understanding what you want to focus on for that market, because you can, if you decide to, it's the same for every market because everybody responds in the same way. It's forgetting that actually people buy a lot emotionally and buy based on their motivations, and different people from different backgrounds have different motivations and certainly different reasons for doing things. So that's where we have to place our thinking and our time.
I feel like this, and I'm excited by this because I hadn't thought about it in this way, that marketers are going to go back to the psychology roots. There's so many marketers who don't realize how closely, because I studied psychology undergrad and I was like, oh, this is the same. But you kind of learn the 4 Ps or you learn the flywheel, and it doesn't mention the word psychology, so people don't get it. But yeah, we're going back to psychological roots. We're going to become market translators rather than just the content doers.
Absolutely. I was about to say, just before you said that, I was going, it's going to require more psychology, because that's where the nuances are. Understanding the different, as I said, motivators for the target audience in different sectors, instead of just saying everybody who is 20 years old and who is female across the world has the same motivations. And it's going to be more subtle. And because of AI, it's going to allow you to be more subtle, because it would have been too expensive to be subtle across a campaign across the world 5 years ago. But it's, in terms of changing creative, adapting creative to be more subtle, you're going to be able to create 500 versions of something at a fraction of the cost, and therefore you can become more subtle. But you've got to do it, with the right right reasoning and a right thought process. And that's where the
is
psychology is going to come into it.
that is really interesting. I really hadn't thought about it in that element. Yay! I love the nuances of marketing. Like there's the big campaigns and the putting content out. I think I fell out of love with social media for a while because of that. I came into the stage of just pumping things out and I'm like, I miss diving into analytics. I miss trying to figure out why did everyone bounce from this one page or they stop scrolling halfway down. Like it's a continuous puzzle.
Yes.
What sticking on the AI question, I'd love to know, are you using AI tools? I think I can assume the answer is yes.
Yes.
And which is your current favorite? Because for me, they're changing daily.
They do change daily. So I use a tool called Fireflies as my meeting assistant. So Fireflies is a godsend. It's, there are lots of meeting assistants, AI assistants around now. Otter is one of the industry. Zoom has obviously one that you're using right now. And I use Fireflies, I found, because I tested a lot of them. And to be honest, I tested them 6 months ago, so things probably have changed. But at the time, I found that Fireflies had the best transcription and certainly the best summaries of the calls I would have.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was doing an awful lot of research calls for the university, I needed something that I could rely on. And it has these amazing tools that allow you to just look at keywords and press the keyword, and it highlights all the points in the transcript that mentions the keywords. But it also tries to summarize the task, the action points from the meeting and stuff like that. It's really cool. So Fireflies is super helpful from a personal productivity point of view. I use Chat GPT like everybody does.
Good old classic. Paid or free?
Well, I use the paid because I use the unified version. So that's become unified in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So unified meaning I know you know, but for your listeners, it's the version that has DALL-E and chat and the internet and data and analytics all in one. So you used to have to, and uploads of you can upload things. So you used to have to upload your PDF using a plugin on a separate chat, and then you would have to copy and paste that into a new chat to then say, hey, do this thing with this upload. And then after that, you wanted a picture to go with it, you would have to do a separate thing with DALL-E on a separate system. All of that is unified. So since that unification, that's probably been my go-to. But I've been playing around with a music AI. So this is not work related. This is fun related. I've been helping a company called Voicify .ai, and they basically do covers. So what you do is you copy and paste a YouTube URL from any song you want into the system. It then the AI strips out the vocals and leaves you with an instrumental, and then you run the vocals through a voice model of another artist. So let's say you take a Taylor Swift song, and then you run the voice model through Bono from U2, say, and then it mixes it back together, and then you have Bono singing a Taylor Swift song. And it is so much fun. You can just spend so much time. And because I do my own music, I've also used it not just for songs that are well known, I've used it for my own music. So I've then, because I've got a terrible voice, but I've sung on my own tracks. And I've then replaced my voice with like Morrissey from the Smiths, or with Peter Gabriel or whatever. And so that's been great fun. So that's probably been one of my favorite tools. But yeah, really at the moment, I'm just trying to keep track. It's crazy.
Fast moving. It is very, very, like 1 month in AI is like a year or even a decade in other industries.
It's mad. It's absolutely mad. I've been trying to get some businesses. So one of the things that I'm doing locally here in the Southwest is teaming up with a few people to see whether we can bring some resources together for businesses and people who kind of not quite burying their heads, but they don't want to get involved with AI because they're a little bit worried about it, or they're not sure, they don't quite fully understand the ramifications. We want to bring some resources together, so some guides to like what to use for what purposes and how to use
Mm.
it. So, just build just to help these companies that might not be as tech savvy as others. So it's kind of the other, it's not TechSpark, it's the other side of TechSpark, which is everybody else that's not in tech,
Yeah.
and helping those companies, because it's moving so fast. But the thing is, a lot of those companies they've not even started
And that's
trying to
the
work
bit.
out. Yeah.
I honestly think any marketers who haven't even just touched ChatGPT, disagree, like it, dislike it, are going to feel the repercussions,
Yeah.
especially next in 2024.
Yeah.
It's the time to mess around. It's the now where everything seems chaotic, is the time to make mistakes, see how you like it, because when it becomes, it's like social. All
Yeah.
the companies that said they didn't want to be involved in social media, I remember when I first started my agency, someone said, you can't sell anything on social media. It's like, you okay? Are you,
Have you been around? What's
have
happening?
you, do you know? Um, Speaking of selling and campaigns, that was a horrible segue, but I tried. Let me know what campaign you like recently or have been seeing that's either inclusive, not so inclusive. Everyone's been
Yeah,
bringing nice ones, so let me know what your one is.
it's interesting. I mean, I don't know whether I classify this as inclusive, but it deals with it's a campaign that really struck home because it deals with sort of male mental health
Mhm.
issues. So I think it's inclusive in a way, because it's obviously dealing with something that used to be taboo, or is probably still seen as taboo in some communities. But it's done in an environment that is actually in some ways super inclusive, which is football, but also not
Mm.
inclusive. So I'm a massive football fan, have been since a tiny child, has played football for as long as my knees allowed me to, has coached football. I could literally live and, I love football. I don't quite love it at the high level as much as I used to,
Mhm.
because I think it's been spoilt by money to a degree. But I love, I love the sort of local football, all aspects of it, and I love what it means to communities. And anyway, this campaign that really struck home is the Norwich City Samaritans campaign. So I don't know if you know about
Oh,
it.
no, I do not. And the Samaritans, I know Samaritans, I know nothing about football, so this is going to be an interesting one.
So yeah, I mean the campaign, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a 2-minute film that Norwich City created with their in-house. They didn't even do this via an agency. They did it in-house, and the camera stays exactly in the same place for 2 minutes, and it just shows two guys, two friends at a football match, and
Mhm.
it goes obviously over time during the football match. And one of them is quite introverted, doesn't get up much, claps very quietly, and the other one's like going crazy every time there's a goal, and is constantly trying to chat to him. And it's going to be a spoiler alert, but basically you get to the end of the video, and the introverted chap turns up and lays a scarf over the seat of the really extroverted chap, because basically the inference is that the extroverted chap took his own life, basically. And it's like the whole point is it's not the people that you actually think who
Mhm.
are struggling that are struggling. And it was an incredible campaign, but which hit home with a lot of people. And what it then did, which I loved, is that it then sort of it hit home very well within Norwich, but they went way beyond. And Norwich is like a championship side, they're not a massive side, but they managed to get pretty much every other side in the championship. So that's 22 clubs, I think it is, or 24,
Mhm.
22 clubs, to all do something on the same weekend. So they basically, on the scoreboard at every single game, like half an hour before the game, they put who's on the team sheet. It appears
Okay.
on the scoreboard. And instead, on the scoreboard, they had the starting 11, exactly the same way. And then it said number 1, mum; number 2, dad; number 3, partner; number 4, colleague; number 5, brother; number 6, sister. So all the people who should be that you should be able to talk to or who are important to you, or that, so the team aspect of it.
Team. Okay, this is
And
your football team.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is your
yeah.
team, and they did that across the entire, pretty much the entire championship, and so that the impact it had was huge, really. And they did it over the tannoy, and the sponsors of the football club, who normally have the shirt sponsorship on the sleeve, on the front, on the back, they all gave their spot over to the Samaritans. So on that weekend, they all had Samaritans logos. So it was just it's just a really great, impactful campaign. And you know what the interesting thing is, it was run by the football club, by the football club's team. It wasn't big money,
agency,
it wasn't outsourcing. And yeah, it was really, really impressive. And the other one that I loved, which has a slight connection, is the Uber, who is it with? It's with the chap from Sex Education.
Oh,
and
the new Doctor Who, isn't he?
No, not that one. But no,
Oh.
he's amazing. No, the what's his name? I'm gonna have to find it here. So it's with.
While you're looking for that one, I love that, because sometimes when a industry partners with a charity, it goes too far away from what the narrative is.
Yes.
And there's so many layers within that about what football is outside of the game itself. Like, football is community, football is friendship, football is all these things, and tradition. And the fact that, not saying that in-house isn't like an agency, but they were able to tap all of that in the partnership, and it didn't feel like it was an ad for either part.
No, exactly.
It's equally balanced, equally yoked, because sometimes in those certain situations, you get to, especially, I feel like charitable ads have changed over the past couple of years, because before you get to, and you're like, they're going to ask for money, you're doubting that moment. You're like, oh, it's going to, they're going to put a QR code on, they're going to do something. But this definitely kept that football narrative, kept that reality, is backed by data, because I did see someone did a data science analysis on football chat rooms and found that, unfortunately, some men do go to football commentary moments before they do take their own life.
Wow.
And they were trying to analyze how to find those comments and contact those individuals before. They said they have like a period of like a day or two.
Wow.
Because football and the teams they support is their family. So they're going there to say goodbye. And all of that awareness, all of that knowledge in an ad that's really the center storyline for me is the friendship and what that means.
Yeah. And absolutely.
So many layers. It's beautiful in partnerships. And this is the element of marketing sometimes that I find tricky. Marketing is still always marketing, but we do get to put across things that are deeper. But at the same time, on the flip end, you're like, so what was the analytics on that?
So what were the KPIs on that one?
What were the KPIs on that one?
Interestingly, us who do like numbers, I'm trying to find. I did read that it had some crazy reach. Like the video on YouTube had something like 40 or 50 million views. I mean, it's absolutely crazy how it took off, and the club got taken completely by surprise. But yes, it's one of these things. There's a lot of lots of things that happened from it that they did not expect. But I think because they planned it so well, I think I seem to remember reading something that they spent at least 4 months just talking with the Samaritans about the ideas and the concepts, and way before they started planning anything. And I think everything else, because the concept was so strong, everything else then fell into place. Like, the other sponsors giving up their space, the other clubs getting involved. It became, because it made so much sense, and it was well thought through. And it was this whole concept that the football club is, you're part of your family, and it needs to be, you need to sort of pay attention to not just the quiet ones, but to everybody around you. I think was really, really important. So yeah, I think it's had an amazing impact, and it's I think guys are really don't talk enough, and so to be able to try and show it in this classic environment of which football has a lot of negativity as well. It's like classic environment where it's foul-mouthed and it can be racist and it can be homophobic and it can be all those things that we've been trying to kick out. But it's also, for a lot of people, it's a very important support, and it can be a very important support. So yeah, I think the context of it was really important. So yeah, great campaign.
I love it.
The reason I was going to mention the other one was not to compare it. It was more that it was there was not similarity, but it was also two guys talking, and this is me. Was talking a lot about balancing the genders, and I've got mostly the campaigns I like are more about guys' mental health. But it was the Robert De Niro and Asa Butterfield. So Asa Butterfield is the guy who plays in Sex Education. He plays the sex therapist character, and it's for Uber Eats, and it's basically the two of them. So one of them, Robert De Niro's obviously in his 80s, Asa is in his 20s, and they basically a friendship strikes up between these two people on set, and but it's all about them doing things together, all powered obviously by Uber or Uber Eats and stuff like that. It's all about experiencing things, and that's bonding over food, bonding over experiences, which I really liked, because even though that's clearly marketing for Uber, it was more the generational total difference, and yet these two people being brought together by experiences, which I really, really loved. I thought that was it's a great, if you haven't seen it, it's a great video. It's well worth watching.
I'll check that one out.
But that's much more like, that was produced by Mother. That's like a proper big budget. So it compares. This is why I prefer the Norwich one if I had to choose. And obviously Norwich deals with suicide, which is on much more on the scale. But this is still an interesting thing about guys needing to talk more and build relationships and bonds.
Yeah, I definitely feel that there's elements of inclusive marketing that aren't the straight up, gender split and all that stuff. There are elements that are just things and content that is, lack of a better phrase, bucking the trend of whatever the industry normally does, and not just the creative trend. It's not saying, hey, if you normally do an ad in a football field, do it in an airplane, not going beyond that, but just looking at what are the taboos that we've been avoiding to talk about, and how can we incorporate that and show our target audience in a different light.
Yes, exactly right. And it's bringing things together that, as you say, you don't normally see friendship developing between an 80-year-old and a 20-year-old, and it's you don't see people talking about suicide at football, and those are the important, really, really. I think it opens up ways for us to talk about not just those things, but a whole bunch of other difficult conversations that people, and they're not shiny and spangly and lovely, are the real conversations, the real topics that we should be addressing, which I think for me, a lot of inclusive marketing, that's what it's about. It's including, yes, different people, different voices, but it's also different subjects and different topics, things that we're not used to bringing to the attention of consumers through marketing.
To the forefront. I love it.
Yeah.
That brings me on to my final question then. What do you think the future of inclusive marketing is going to be, will look like, will feel like? What are your thoughts?
Wow, this is really interesting. I mean, because I'm an optimist. I'm usually quite a positive optimist, but I do think we have well entered and are in the middle of a sort of period of where there is what's the word I'm looking for? In terms of there's polarization, really. So there's what we here would like to see, which is all these topics we talked about, nothing's taboo. That actually we think about our target audience as what they are, which is a multicultural mixture of people, and we therefore think about how the nuances are. So how we talk to them. There's that whole world. which I'd like to think is where the majority lives. But I do also think that there's this crazy sort of side, which is thinking of all of this as woke, and I don't have a problem with the word woke, because I see the word woke as actually having empathy and understand. But I actually see there's a whole group, quite a vocal and large group, certainly in the States, possibly in certainly in Western Europe, which is therefore fighting against that and being very, very vocal. So I think we're going to be going through a period of battle to a degree, and it's seeing where the brands and where the money goes is important, because fundamentally money does talk. And if, like, was it this week, another bunch of brands left the platform that used to be called Twitter, and finally are going, this is too much, we've got to stop backing this, that will hopefully move towards putting that sort of money into platforms and content, and that actually goes along the lines of more the topics we talked about that needed to be covered, the way things are portrayed, all of that. And then if it does happen that way, then I think that the future is bright in that sense, that we're then, it's then about testing how do we bring all of these things together in a way that is the right way, but also still, as you said, it still hits the KPIs and delivers the results, right? But I do fear there's going to be an ongoing battle for a few years with this view that anything inclusive, which is obviously the right thing to do, is bizarrely seen as woke, and therefore, in a weird way, being restrictive or anti-free speech, or all these just crazy bonkers ideas, but that are getting an awful lot of time and causing a lot of rifts. So yeah, I think the power is going to be with the brands, and it's going to be up to them to decide how they want to play it. And for me, it should, the consumers should be the winners, and the consumers are a massive, what's the word, a sort of mesh of all sorts of backgrounds and people, and that's basically who you want to communicate with. So you should get with the program and communicate in a way that engages all of these different people.
It's interesting, because I think, going back to what we mentioned earlier about with AI, people are going to go back to psychology. And I feel, I don't have the proof, but I do feel some brands are choosing inclusive marketing because they know they'll get a certain response from a certain audience that is negative. But that negative, going back to marketing being marketing, leads to clicks, leads to other things writing. And if we're going back to marketing based on evoking emotion, we might accidentally all become inclusive in a weird way.
Yeah.
Like I think, and it's making me think, we keep saying we're going to do a case study on this, but it's making me think of Buzz Light and some of the things that happened in all of that backlash, or however it was people were buying the product to destroy the product. Which in business case is actually kind of, because they're still spending money.
Yeah.
But it's weird and very capitalist society element of it. But I like the balance of, optimism, but some elements of realism. We might stumble into it. I am neither nor. I'm just like, society will societize as it does.
As it does.
That's not a word. But thank you so much for joining me, David. I really, really appreciate having you on the podcast.
It's been a real pleasure. Always good to see you.
And, good to see you too. Let the people know where they can find you.
So yeah, well, interestingly, where am I? I'm not on X anymore, so that's off. The best place for me is LinkedIn these days, probably. So David Maher Roberts. I am on Insta at David PMR. I think it is. But yes, that's pretty much it these days. I've kind of closed down my Twitter account, and I've been playing with Threads. I'm not yet sure how that's panning out, but I think I've got the same. It's the same as my Insta. So Threads or Insta are the best place.
Okie dokie. We'll pop all those links in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for tuning in to the Marketing Made Inclusive podcast. I'm your host, Joyann Boyce. You can find me on all social networks at Joyann Boyce. And tune in next week for another episode where we dive into all things inclusive marketing.